Welcome. It's 11 o'clock. Let's get started. Title of the webinar, How Healthy Conflict Increases Creativity and Better Decisions. All right. I've just been running a 5 behaviors workshop for a leadership team over the last 2 days. And those of you that know anything about 5 behaviors know that conflict is the second behavior. It starts off with trust. That we have to have a healthy degree of vulnerability-based trust in order for people to feel comfortable speaking up. And then we can engage in healthy conflict. And actually, that's why this profile was developed, probably 4 years ago now, I think. But after 5 Behaviors was launched back in 2014, and we started running 5 Behaviors of a cohesive team with teams across the country and around the world, for that matter, it became apparent fairly quickly that the conflict behavior was something that most people struggle with more than any of the other behaviors. Well, maybe accountability as well, but that's sort of a little bit like conflict, isn't it? People holding each other accountable. And so let me just go through the agenda, what I want to cover today. All right, so what is the impact of conflict on today's workplace? What is the difference between conflict resolution and productive conflict, which is what we're going to be dealing with? Then we're going to look at the everything disc productive conflict learning experience. All right, so yes, it's a disc profile. And in addition to measuring your disc style, it provides feedback about how you engage in conflict and how your disc style affects the way you engage in conflict. And I think that's the big aha for most people. If you're going to learn to be more productive, then we need to understand why I tend to react the way I do when my reactions are not productive. Okay, and then next steps, where do we go following on from this? And so the first thing I would ask a group when we're talking about conflict is, what does conflict mean to you? All right, and these are the kinds of words that come up for people. All right, and there's probably a lot more than those as well, but for some of it's really very negative, isn't it? Fighting and bullying and gossip and drama, etc. In fact, in a survey that Wiley did, they found that over 90% of the things that people came up with were negative experiences of conflict. Okay, so people don't like conflict. And as I just said a moment ago, 90% of the responses were negative, and that's out of 12,000 people. Okay, those in management positions, 70% said conflict negatively impacts the efficiency in their department. All right, it wastes time, but it also wastes energy. You know, you consume energy 3 times faster when you're in a negative conflict than you do in a normal state. All right, it leaves you drained, doesn't it? 40% of people have left a job because of unhealthy conflict. All right, and in fact, one of the experiences I heard yesterday was one of the team was actually thinking of leaving because of conflict with another team member. But fortunately, it came up during the session and the realization that they needed to deal with that in a healthy way. Okay, so conflict is an uncomfortable and unavoidable part of every workplace, and organizations need to learn how to effectively navigate conflict to thrive. Conflict is not going away. It's always going to be there. It's part of the human experience. It's part of people working together. And so we can harness productive conflict and how to deal with those situations, it has an enormous impact on the team and the organization. Okay, so let's look at what conflict resolution was about. It's the process of resolving a dispute without confrontation, reactively addressing conflict once it's appeared. Right, it often involves negotiation or mediation or arbitration after the conflict has occurred, and it aims to eliminate conflict with a step-by-step process. All right, let's resolve it. Okay, so it would be better if we didn't have the negative conflict in the first place. So productive conflict is an open exchange of different ideas and opinions. All right, and that's a key point, that when we're talking about conflict in Pat Lencioni's 5 behaviors model, that the behavior of conflict around conflict is, it's not about conflict with people that we're encouraging, it's conflict about ideas and opinions. That is an open exchange of different ideas and opinions. Productively engaging in conflict in the moment. So when it arises, we need some tools that we can actually react in a positive, productive way, rather than an instinctive negative way. In productive conflict, all parties feel equally heard, respected, and unafraid to voice dissenting opinions, and strives to reach a mutually comfortable solution. One of the items that comes up often when we're talking about conflict is disagreeing, voicing dissenting opinions. You know, the computer company, Intel, who create computer processors and chips and stuff like that. And you've probably had in the past, not so much these days, you've had a computer with a little badge on it that said Intel inside. One of their policies is that when people go to a meeting, they're expected to disagree, but they're also expected to commit to the decisions that come out of the discussion. Right? So everybody is encouraged to disagree. So they call it disagree and commit is the policy. Okay. And yet some people really struggle with disagreeing. They see it as creating conflict. Actually, it creates much better ideas and much better decisions. All right. So everything just productive conflict facilitator kit and profile. We're going to have a little bit of a look in the profile, and we're going to have a look at the process in the kit. The kit basically is built around a half-a-day workshop or facilitated debrief, I would say, of the productive conflict profile. So if this is something that's of interest to you, you can actually get the kit and just plug and play and run a productive conflict workshop. And you can actually get people to do the profile before they do the workshop, obviously, and then it's going to be much more productive. Okay, so what's the process about? Okay, it's first of all understanding yourself and others in conflict using DISC. How does your DISC style contribute to the way you react in conflict? And you know that already just from the people that you know, the people that you work with, the people that you live with. They react to conflict in very, very different ways, all right? And a big part of it is their DISC style, all right? Because DISC is a needs-driven behavioral model, all right? And so because of your needs, you therefore have some fears. And when you get into conflict situations, you naturally tend to react in a certain way in order to satisfy your needs or to avoid reacting to a fear, okay? So that's the first part, is really understanding yourself, but also understanding how different styles react in conflict situations, all right? The second part in the profile itself and in the workshop is understanding your destructive conflict responses. What are typical destructive responses? And when we look at the list of those in a little while, you'll see that there's a really wide range of destructive behaviors that people use. And you'll recognize them because you'll see some of them that you use in yourself or that people that you work with or live with use, all right? And it's a reaction, all right? It's not, oh, I think I'll do this today. You're just reacting to the negative emotions that come up, all right? And as we'll see, the automatic thoughts that come up, okay? And if you've studied any neuroscience, you're probably well aware of the fact that your amygdala in your brain is actually searching for potential threats constantly. And when it spots a threat, it fires off negative emotions, right? And those negative emotions can then translate into destructive conflict responses, all right? So that's the middle part of the profile and of the workshop. And of course, the last part is changing your behavior and choosing more productive responses, all right? So the profile provides some really good advice on how you can do that and how you can do it based on your behavioral style. So how does your DISC style affect that? Okay. All right. So let's dive into the first part, yourself and conflict, part one. So understanding conflict using the Everything DISC productive conflict profile, exploring your own DISC profile and style, and then learning about other DISC styles in conflict. Okay. So let's look at an example. Here's Ruby. Ruby is a D style, right? So her typical behavior in conflict can be insensitive, creates win-lose situations, becomes dismissive of others when something goes wrong, and winning arguments is important to Ruby, all right? When I first saw this, and I thought, wow, no wonder they just keep going, all right? I'm an SI style, so winning arguments is not something that I go to in a conflict situation, right? But it's really helpful to know that if I'm getting into a conflict situation and the person I'm talking to is wanting to win the argument, just keeping on going and keeping on pushing, I need to understand that that's what they naturally tend to do. That's part of how they deal with conflict. All right. So if we dive into the profile, like other DISC profiles, you'll find some cornerstone principles. But before we do that, there's a little definition here of what we mean by conflict. It's whatever you think of conflict, conflict comes down to a difference of opinions involving strong emotions. All right. So it is emotional. Okay. And so the Everything DISC Productive Conflict Profile is designed to improve self-awareness around conflict behaviors. It isn't about conflict resolution. Rather, it's focused on helping you curb destructive thoughts and behaviors so that conflict can become productive before getting to the destructive, okay? Which of course would then improve workplace results and relationships, all right? So the cornerstone principles, like with the workplace profile, they're just to give us a foundation of what's behind this, right? Conflict is inevitable, part of workplace relationships, and it can be productive. They may be influenced by other factors, hierarchy, culture, not necessarily just your DISC style, okay? Your response to conflict is in your own control. You cannot control how others respond. But I think there are some people who don't think that it is in their control. I can't help myself, right? Well, actually, when we find out what causes us to react that way, we can start to recognize some signals, right? And learning how to take control of how we behave in conflict situations, okay? So learning about other styles and how they react to conflict can help you understand where they're coming from. And you can have productive conflict by using this to more effectively engage with others, okay? So here is the DISC model. You're all familiar with that, I hope. And if you're not, 4 primary styles, okay? And yes, we break that down into 12 distinct styles. And each style is driven by different needs and fears. And so each style behaves differently in conflict. We can see here the D style focuses on logic and victory, winning, okay? The I style focuses on expressing themselves. And if they're emotional and in a conflict situation, that can be pretty, very expressive, and they're sharing a lot of feeling and getting really passionate. The steadiness or S style focuses on feelings and consensus, right? They want to create harmony if they can. And of course, the C style focuses on justice and logic. Is it right? And just focus on the facts and trying to avoid dealing with emotions. All right, so that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? All right, so looks like we've already been through those. So then, as in other DISC profiles, there's a narrative report. So this is Ruby, right? The D style person. You can see where her dot sits. It's not easy to see, but you'll see there's a little bit of extra striped shading on the C, in the C scale there, C quadrant, on objectivity. So Ruby has an extra priority on objectivity. And so the narrative report here focuses on her priorities, all right? So the priorities in this profile are very different from the workplace priorities or the other priorities of the other profiles. So the primary focus of the D style in conflict is to control. And that would make sense. They want to control the situation and control the conflict, all right? And then the second priority is assertion. So there's a paragraph about that, about how Ruby wants to project strength and someone of authority when she's in conflict. And justification, focusing on the facts and the logic. And then, of course, because she's got an extra priority on objectivity, that comes into play in her style in conflict as well, okay? So what's your DISC style? And what are your conflict priorities? They may be very different from that. Now, typically in this situation, when we're facilitating this, we would get people to personalize it, tick the things you agree with, put a cross on things you don't agree with, question mark if you're not real sure, all right? And the interpretation is very personalized. Ruby your dot and shading say a lot about how you respond in conflict, okay? I'm not going to go into detail about that and about Ruby in particular, but the next part of the profile is very interesting, and that's where we look at, if you remember in page 6 in the workplace profile, you have your motivators and stressors. Well, this is similar, all right? What you value in conflict, okay? And again, we see in the list here for Ruby that one of the things she really values is winning arguments, all right? And so that explains why in conflict situations she becomes so forceful and pushy to get the result that she wants, okay? And then down the bottom of the page is what drains your energy during conflict. And these situations might be quite stressful for you, like lacking control, when control is her number one priority, okay? The profile goes into quite a bit of depth too on understanding your relationships with others in conflict, and how they are compared to you. What do they tend to do? And then how can you have a more productive relationship with each of the different styles? So it's a lot of resource in here that can help you with conflict situations. All right, so this profile is something that's really handy to keep around, especially if there's any conflict going on. Okay, now page 10 is a bit of a summary, and it's the end of the first section in the profile, and the end of the first module in the facilitation. And it just summarizes each of the styles in conflict. But then it asks you to reflect on what you've learned so far. All right, so the question there is, think of a conflict situation you were in that you wish you would have handled better. Briefly describe it below. And so you would then give your participants a few minutes to think about that and jot something down. And then what impact do you think your DISC style had on the situation now that you've learned more about how DISC relates to the different reactions to conflict? Okay. All right. So now this case study, I'm going to call it, that you're asking people to come up with here, they're going to revisit that as they go through the actual session around the profile. Okay. So let's, the reflection is very important. Okay. So let's look at an example of an incident here. Okay. Ruby's saying, now that I know how I react in conflict, how can I recognize my destructive conflict behaviors and what triggers them? And that's the second module in the facilitation. Okay, so we're going to look at automatic thoughts and how they influence destructive responses. We're going to identify and understand your own destructive behaviors and learn to recognize your automatic thoughts during conflict. So here's an example for Ruby. Oh no, this is actually not Ruby. We're going to switch to somebody else. Okay, so this is a C-style person, all right? And he's got this automatic thought that bubbles up that says, if the situation gets heated, it will be awful, all right? So how do you think that's going to affect his feelings, all right? It's going to create anxiety about the situation turning awful. So what does he do? His response to that anxiety is to withdraw, all right? Now, withdrawal is one of the forms of destructive conflict, okay? A destructive reaction to a situation, because it's not constructive to withdraw and avoid the conflict. Okay, so destructive behavior in conflict is not necessarily aggressive. In fact, a lot of it's passive aggressive. Okay, so then another potential thought that might pop up is, I can wear down this person with superior logic. And so that's the thinking. The feeling is to be defiant, and I can wear them down and then overpower them with logic. Okay, so in the profile, Wiley identified 18 destructive responses based on research that's been done into this whole area of destructive responses to conflict. And if you see looking through that list, you'll recognize some of those. All right, and the participants are asked to put a tick mark, or a check mark, as they say in American, on the 3 behaviors that other people use that you find difficult to handle. All right, and then you're asked to put a star on the responses, on the destructive responses that you tend to use most often. All right, so the sample here is this person tends to become hypercritical, they tend to become defensive, and they tend to use sarcasm. Okay, What are your three, do you think? Which ones do you go to mostly? I know for me, it's more likely I'm going to withdraw or cave in is my natural instinct in conflict situations, especially when things get a bit heated. All right, but then that's probably typical for an SI style, isn't it? Okay, so there's 7 personalized pages in the profile for each of these destructive responses, each of the 18. And for each of them, let me go a little bit further. So for example, for arguing, it's exchanging different points of view in a heated or tense way. And the wording here is personalized to you, the person who took the profile. All right. So this is Ruby again. So like others with the D style, you may come across having so much confidence in your vision that it's frustrating when others can't see or won't see what's obvious to you. So as that frustration grows, you may defend your position more and more aggressively. Okay. And the automatic thoughts that trigger that behavior is there's no way I'm backing down. I don't get it, or I don't get you. I'm obviously right. Now, if you've got that thought, then obviously you're going to not back down. You're going to get stuck in and argue. Okay, so that's the key thing about this model. And this is cognitive behavioral theory that's very, very widely used now in coaching and counseling and psychology. All right, it's being cognitively aware of what I'm thinking and how it's affecting my behavior. Right, so I've got to become aware of what my thoughts are. All right, and then once I've got the awareness, then I've got a choice as to whether I act on those thoughts or maybe change it a little bit. Okay, I just skipped over a slide here because I was in a hurry to get to where I wanted to go. Let me just go back there for a sec. This slide here. Okay, so this is the actual process that results in a destructive response. Okay, this conflict occurs, I have an automatic thoughts, and I just react, and then I get that destructive response. All right, so they're the destructive responses. Now, why do people do that? Okay, I'm just going to, the automatic thoughts, where do they come from? Okay, well, I'm just throwing in here the disc theory model, and I know some of you have seen this many times before. Hopefully you use it. But it shows the needs and fears of the different styles. Okay, and so Ruby has an outstanding need to achieve results, and so her greatest fear is losing control, because when she's not in control, she can't control what she achieves. All right, so when there's a situation comes up where she's losing control, it triggers that fear, which can then trigger the need to argue or to dominate the situation. All right. And so, which is very different to what an S-style person is going to do in a conflict situation, or what's going to trigger conflict for them is their need for acceptance and not making sure they're creating harmony and not disappointing others or not hurting people's feelings. So they're going to be very maybe tentative about how they say things. All right. And so the conflict's going to be very, very different. So DISC has an impact on how people react. And it's the needs and fears of the different DISC styles that result in that. Now, this next page in the profile is, to me, one of the best pages. All right. And this is stuff from Dr. Mark Scullard, who's the research director, and he did the research to identify what are the automatic thoughts that are triggered by each of the different styles. All right. So for Ruby, I need to come out on top. Why don't you just get that I'm right? If you push me, I'll push back harder. Right. And so they're the thoughts that are coming up, which result in a negative or destructive behavioral responses to conflict. Okay. When I read through this in my own profile, it was like, how does he know this about me? It was just amazing how accurate it was. And once I know what these automatic thoughts are, I can start to recognize them when they start coming up in future. All right. So then at this point, we're going to go back to our case study, as I called it. All right. The conflict situation you described that you wish you'd handled differently, right? So what were some of the automatic thoughts that you had? And here's an example for Ruby. Her thought was, you have no idea what you're talking about, right? And so the behavior was dismissive, argumentative, maybe even walk out of the meeting. Okay. So let's go back to Ruby. Now that I understand my automatic thoughts, how they influence my behavior, How can I change my response in conflict? Okay, and this is the third module, third section of the profile. Okay, so we're going to practice catching and reframing automatic responses, and we're going to continue evaluating and improving conflict experiences. Okay, so in the profile, we'll see this graphic, which started with conflict, and then we had the automatic thought. But instead of going straight to a destructive response, we're going to first step back and reframe. Why don't I just blow that up so that's easier for you to see? Okay, and then we can choose a productive response. All right. So, and as I said before, this is a cognitive behavioral theory that's being very widely used now. Cognitive, it's in my mind, it's in my prefrontal cortex, if you like, in the brain, where I'm cognitively aware of the automatic thoughts and how that's affecting my feelings. All right, so I'm going to recognize that, and I'm going to catch and reframe that automatic thought and choose a more productive response. So let's look at an example from Ruby this time. Okay, so conflict situation, you have no idea what you're talking about. The feelings to be defiant because you don't know what you're talking about, and to be argumentative. Okay, so what if she reframed that? Okay, and change that thought to, he may have a different perspective. I need to listen. Right, so the feelings would be to be more open-minded, and then behavior would be to listen. Okay, so there's a section in the profile where people get practice at reframing their automatic thoughts. All right, and this little piece at the top here, once we're able to step back, the next step is to reframe. The following questions can help us do this. These are really great questions, and I think if you really want to get good at using these, I would create a little cutout of that and stick it somewhere where you can see it in your workstation or on your phone on the bottom of your video, just your monitor or somewhere like that, just to remind you, is this thought actually valid or true? Am I overreacting or exaggerating the problem? Is there another way I could look at this situation? Okay, and so on this page, participants have the opportunity to reframe the automatic thought, and we're going to go back to the case study. All right, so here we have on the bottom of page 22, is it? That think back to your conflict situation from page 10 and the automatic response you described on page 19. How could you reframe your automatic thoughts? And so in this case, Ruby chose, he may have a different perspective, I need to listen. All right, and then with your new way of thinking, what response would you have chosen? Well, I think I need to listen better to Dave. Okay, now what you'll see on this page is a list of productive responses on a continuum. Okay, and so from easy to difficult. So how good are you at this? Where would you plot yourself on finding it easy to apologize versus difficult to apologize? All right, I've met some people who pride themselves on having never apologized, and I think, wow, isn't that interesting? What would it be like to go through life never apologizing for anything? Goodness me, it does happen. Okay, so if you look through that list, where would you put yourself on that continuum? How many of those would you find easy, and how many would you find more difficult? All right, now one of the things you could do with this is say, well, actually communicating openly and honestly might be difficult, so what can I do to learn to do that better? All right, and who can I ask to help me with that? All right, who do I work with or live with who could help me be more effective in doing that? Okay, and so these are obviously very important when it comes to choosing a different response once I've identified what the automatic thought is. Okay, and then there's the worksheet in the back of the profile, and it just takes that case study idea and says, okay, in the future, you've had a conflict or you're in a conflict situation, describe the conflict situation. What are the automatic thoughts that resulted in your response, and what was your response? And then reframe that automatic thought, and how did you reframe it? And if you have reacted defensively, what could you have done better or different in that situation? All right. And in the kit, the facilitator kit for this program, there's actually a PDF file as a separate document of this page, so that you can provide your participants with the PDF file so that they can use it on an ongoing basis when conflicts arise for them. Okay. So one of the tools that's very helpful in understanding others and how they react differently is Catalyst. And if you haven't looked at it yet, I would hope you've heard about it. We've been going on and on about it for 2 years now. Okay, can't believe it's 2 years already since Catalyst came out. But it actually, Wiley, we're working on Catalyst, which is an online portal for hosting your profile. Your profile it's not given to you in a PDF file, it's given to you in a link to your profile on Catalyst. And it's dynamic and alive, and there's lots of good stuff in there. And there's the opportunity for you to look at comparisons between yourself and the other people that you work with, your colleagues, as we call it in there. Okay. And being able to access that information can be really helpful in how to minimize conflict, knowing how to approach people, how to communicate with them more effectively in a way that meets their needs. So if you haven't explored Catalyst yet, I would certainly encourage you to do that. All right. And then here's just a little snapshot of the Your Colleagues section. Many of you would know Alicia. Alicia is still on maternity leave at the moment. Little Evie is, 6 months old now, I think. And she'll be coming back to us early next year. But Alicia, I've chosen her to show my comparison with Alicia because she's the only D-style person in our team. And so the rest of us are mostly S-style. And so what's important about this information, some people are concerned that, do I want everybody in my organization to see me in Catalyst? Well, they're not seeing you, they're seeing a comparison really between you and them. But look at the information it's given, right? Have you noticed that Alicia tends to be confident and direct, asserting a perspective, etc.? It's positive stuff. Right, Alicia cares about, right? That's really helpful for me to know what she cares about. And also, when should I pull Alicia in to a discussion? Okay, well, when a conversation needs to be candid, right? No nonsense approach is needed. An immediate action or change is needed. Okay, well, that's very good information to have, isn't it? And if I'm Alicia, I would really want other people to know those things about me. Wouldn't you want to know this positive stuff? Other people to know that. So, and of course, don't do these things. Don't waste the time. Don't get bogged down in routine, etc., because that might stress her a bit. Okay, so very valuable information. And of course, it goes on to provide 8 continua, which shows where Alicia and I both sit on there, and where we're similar and different, and a whole lot of information as to how I can use that for us to work together more effectively. Okay. So Catalyst is a really great tool for building on understanding of each other so that we can minimize those conflicts. Okay. All right. So a recipe for productive conflict. First of all, individual understanding of self and others in conflict. Right. So the first section of the profile, how does our DISC style affect how I behave in conflict, but also how my colleagues behave in conflict, right? Recognizing destructive thoughts and habitual responses and what's causing those automatic thoughts, all right? And I think it's really helpful exercise to go through those 18 destructive responses and identify those that you tend to use, and then to go into the detail on those 7 pages to look at the automatic thoughts that trigger those and how my style contributes to that. Okay. Catch and reframe thoughts when the conflict occurs, right? And then choose a more productive response. Okay. And then maintain commitment to finding mutually comfortable solutions. So I think we've all had a situation where we've reacted with one of those destructive responses, all right? And afterwards you're like, oh, why did I do that, right? And the idea is to actually recognize and be more conscious and aware of it when it's happening, when it's starting to happen. And it might be that we get halfway through reacting and then you suddenly realize what you're doing. And then what do? Do you keep going? We can learn to recognize in the middle of situations that we're doing it. And then that's a good time to say, well, hang on, let me step back from this. Okay, give me a minute here. And then you start thinking through, well, what's the automatic thought? How can I reframe this? All right. It is possible to start short-circuiting. The automatic thoughts are still going to come up, right? Because they're triggered by your needs and fears. Okay, mainly your fears, I think. But the more quickly we learn to recognize them, the more we become skillful at not moving to the destructive response. Okay, and instead short-circuiting that and going to a productive response. Okay, one of my favorite expressions is when I find myself doing stuff is, isn't that interesting? Right? And I might even say that out loud if I'm in a situation with someone. I'm starting to react and say, oh, isn't that interesting? I'm feeling really frustrated here. I'm not sure what's going on. Then we can explore it. Okay, so productive conflict profile, great tool. Okay, any questions? Let me see if we've got one in the Q&A, it seems. Okay, Rob asks, you mentioned early on that we need trust before being able to move to healthy conflict. Do you have any advice, suggestions on how to use the DISC and productive profiles to help build trust? Yeah, Rob, I think, I don't know if you're familiar with the Integro trust model. If you're not, we've got webinars we've done around that, and we've got resources on our website around that. But 4 behaviors that build trust: acceptance, openness, congruence or straightforwardness, and reliability. All right. And if you've got a really accepting, open relationship, it's much easier to move into healthy conflict. All right. But it helps to have a conversation about it. We need respect. Now, people, this team I worked with the last 2 days, we right at the very outset, somebody said, well, one of the good things we got going, I think we all respect each other. We sort of like each other even, all right? But yes, there are little conflicts going on and things like that. And there was a one of the expressions that came out a number of times was, we're too polite to each other, all right? Because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, okay? And so people, when they try to be polite, avoid moving into that productive conflict, all right? And so it's getting permission to say, I don't agree with that. I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure I like that. All right. And but key to it is people accepting each other, right? Creating a climate where there's no judgment of people for who they are. I think that's the key, Rob, to that question. Oh, yes, we've got a question coming up. Oh, good. Rob found the trust model on the website. Awesome. Got any questions about it? Just let me know. I'm happy to talk some more about that. Could I detail the cost for this package? Yes. The facilitator kit is $1,600. And I didn't have time in this short webinar to show any of the videos, but there were a ton of videos in here that really bring it to life. And some really great videos showing 2 people getting into conflict and the automatic thoughts that come up. And so the participants are asked which automatic thought actually triggered the destructive response. Because it usually starts off with an initial automatic thought, and then it gets worse, and then it gets worse, and then the next thing we're deep into it. So $1,600 for the kit. The profiles, if you've got an Epic account, which I know a lot of you do have, it's 25 Epic credits for the profile per person. Megan asks, how do you engage employees to participate in workshops or profiling such as this when they're reluctant to do so? Look, I think one of the reasons people and organizations don't provide this training is because of the fear of talking about conflict, let alone doing training around it. But look, I think if someone said to me, I'm not sure I want to do this, my question would be, do you experience any conflict at work? And I don't know anyone that could say no to that, right? And if they are saying no to that, it's because they're actually avoiding conflict. And so they're experiencing destructive behavior of avoidance and withdrawing. And as Patrick Lencioni has this conflict continuum concept that he has a short video on, where at one end of the continuum, you've got artificial harmony, and at the other end of the continuum, you've got really destructive, mean-spirited conflict. And productive conflict is sort of right here in the middle. And that's the best place for teams to be, engaging in all the productive conflict they can. But the fear is that the further I move away from artificial harmony, the more I'm getting close to destructive conflict, which is horrible. All right. And so I think we need to educate people that there is no need to avoid conflict. We just need to be good at doing it in a productive way. Okay. So, yeah, it does require talking about it, I think. And Zoe asked, do you have any tips for identifying the negative thoughts? I understand it's important to catch yourself, but do you have any tips or suggestions we can supply managers to help them in recognizing a need to catch themselves? Look, the profile is the only way I know to do that, because when they can see how their behavioral style causes their automatic thoughts, right? And page 19, I showed you and said, this is my favorite page. And when I read my automatic thoughts on that page, because they're automatic thoughts for my style, they weren't written about me personally, but when I read them, it feels like they were. They're so spot on. So that's the best tool I know to help managers understand the kind of thoughts that come up from them. And when they look at it in a profile like that, and everyone else is doing the same, and they're all looking at them and laughing and saying, wow, that's so true. It's normal, right? It's normal behavior to do that. So I think that it's really worth the investment to, especially with managers, to give them the opportunity to learn how to manage conflict, because they're dealing with it all the time. And oftentimes when people are in conflict, they'll come to the manager and say they're having a problem with so-and-so. And well, ideally, you want the people that are having the conflict to learn how to engage in a productive way. And teaching them through this would be ideal. Okay. Question, can I confirm the profile is on Catalyst or paper-based? It's not on Catalyst. So it's available through your Epic account, and obviously you produce a PDF file for that. And yes, you can print that out as a booklet. Okay. Well, I think it's the kind of profile that is handy to have the booklet, so you can keep it handy as a resource. Okay. Oh, I've just been told that I made a mistake. Thanks, Mel. The profile is 20 credits, not 25 credits. Okay. And so that's around $150. Okay. And there's a question, why is it more expensive than the workplace profile? There's more value in it in terms of what it offers. There's so much more information, so much more research went into it. And the workplace profile, yes, there's a lot of research behind that as well. It's about understanding yourself and other people and how to improve your relationships, which obviously is very valuable, but it's something that is good for everybody. Mind you, I'd say the productive conflict profile is something that's good for everybody as well. It's something that everybody in the organization can use. Okay, the cost of the Patrick Lencioni training. The cost of doing the Patrick Lencioni training with a team, and it's a 2-day program for a team-based approach, and there's a team assessment where team members fill out a question about the team and how effective they are in each of the 5 behaviors. It also incorporates their own DISC profile, so it's very personalized as well. And so you're looking at 2 days of facilitation by an accredited facilitator, and about $260, I think, per team member for the profile. Okay. So 2 days of facilitation, depending on who the facilitator is, could be $4,000, $5,000 per day, something like that. And you're usually going to be you do want to talk to someone who is an experienced facilitator, because it's a challenging program to facilitate, as you can imagine. We can't add the conflict profile to Catalyst at this point in time. So there's no extra cost to add it there, because we just can't add it at this point. Okay. Question is there a credit if they already have a workplace profile? The answer is no. They're separate profiles, and you're actually paying for the profile itself, not for taking the questionnaire. Okay. And Mel's just added, it's about $400 per person to do 5 behaviors plus the facilitation. Okay. And I've done the 5 behaviors 2-day facilitation with, I don't know, 30 teams, mostly executive teams, over the past 6 years or so. And I've never had anyone question the worth of it, the value of it, because of the difference it makes, the massive impact it has on the team and the way they operate. Okay. And just think about it. With working on a team where there's a high level of trust, where people can speak up and disagree and engage in healthy conflict, and that results in better decisions and stronger commitment to decisions. And then people hold each other accountable, because we've all committed to doing things, and it only makes sense that my peers will hold me accountable because I committed to doing things. And then we're all focused on the collective results of the team. What a great place to work, huh? Why are there conflict questions when onboarding Catalyst? Okay. When they launched Catalyst 2 years ago, the initial plan was to have the workplace profile, the management profile, the Agile EQ profile, and the productive conflict profile, ultimately on Catalyst. All right. And so they included the priority questions for Catalyst in the questions are asked when you're onboarding to Catalyst. So that's why they're there. All right. At this point in time, they've decided that other priorities in Catalyst are more important than adding the productive conflict profile to it. Okay. They are working on more applications without taking more profiles. And so one of the things that they will be working on is some applications about your disc style and conflict without having to take another profile to get the responses. Okay. They've just added group maps to Catalyst, where you can see your team and you can put together a group of, I think it's up to 20 people. I just attended a conference 2 weeks ago in the States, and one of the things that's coming soon in that group function is you'll be able to see where your team sits on all the continua and stuff like that too. So there's more applications coming for team leaders to learn to manage their teams more effectively in Catalyst. So that's the kind of stuff that they're investing their time and money into in improving Catalyst. Sorry, I can't offer any more than that as far as productive conflict on Catalyst, because there's no answers. Okay, that's good. We've had 13 questions. Any more? If there's no more questions, I'll wrap it up there. Any more questions that come up, please feel free to get in contact with our office, 1-800-222-902, and support@integro.com.au. And I'd be happy to help with anything. We, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of S's in our team. And that's not by design. That's just, they're the kind of people we attract because they love helping people. So don't be afraid to ask. All right. Thank you. And there's our contact details, phone number and website, integro.com.au, and email. All right. Thanks again. Look forward to you joining us again in the future, and we'll see you sometime. Bye.